Here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm always tempted to say good morning, but we have just gone over into the afternoon. It is 12 noon on Friday, the 5th of February. We're into the second month of the year already. Very warm welcome. My name is Mary Gregory, and this is Lessons in Leadership. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome today TJ Power. Hello, TJ.
Hi, Mary. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing really, really well. We're coming towards the weekend. It's always a nice time to be talking to people. So I'm really pleased to have you on the show today. This, to me, what I want to flag is that for me, leadership happens in all walks of life, all ages, all generations. It's not exclusive. It includes everybody. So it's really pleased to have you here as a younger person today, because you're still in your 20s. And, we're joking before when we were preparing for this, saying, I'm old enough to be your mother, which I am actually, because you're about the same age as my daughter. But yeah, it's great to have you here, because I think you've already got some insight and wisdom to share, particularly in the focus that you've trained in yourself and the work that you're doing around psychological well-being and mental health as well. So both of those, to me, are really pertinent areas when it comes to leaders. And when we first spoke also, you said, I don't know whether I am a leader. And I just want to flag that often we don't think that we are leaders. And I personally have a view that potentially we are all leaders. It doesn't matter what age, we are leaders in our own life. We are making a difference just by how we show up in the world. So I just wanted to acknowledge you as a leader and a new thought leader on the scene, definitely making a difference and making headway, not only with individuals, but also in the corporate world as well. So that's kind of enough of me. I feel like I've just talked at you there, and I want to really engage you and get you talking, because you're the person that's got the wisdom that's going to be shared today. I'd like to hear a bit more, if we could just start out, about your journey and what's brought you to follow the path that you've followed so far.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, a bit about my story. I went to study psychology at A levels because I thought it seemed kind of interesting. I'd kind of had my experience of challenges with my mind when I was a bit younger, and kind of had found things that were supporting me, and had seen lots of my friends beginning this kind of mental health conversation. Because when I was about 16, 17, 18, it was still so new about 6 or 7 years ago. It was still like the concept of anxiety. It wasn't even really a word that being thrown around, especially in my walk of life. And started studying psychology. Have found that it was just super, super interesting and the thing that I connected with the most. So I then went to university to study it. And my kind of passion for it began to grow. I began really researching it, watching a huge amount of content online to try and get a very up-to-date insight into psychology. And that led me down a path towards doing a module in mindfulness at university. And during my time, I found that quite a lot of what I was learning at university was quite old-fashioned in a sense. A lot of it, although incredibly insightful knowledge, it wasn't that applicable anymore to the world that we now live in. It's a very new space, this world we're living in, with a new world of technology and everything. So I came across this mindfulness module, and at first found mindfulness incredibly difficult and thought, blimey, this is not something I'm good at or very able to spend much time in silence. And then began to see quite a transformation in my head, in my self-talk, my relationship with myself, my ability to kind of respond during challenging moments. And over the time of that module, began to really connect and thought, wow, mindfulness is something that I want to make quite a pivotal and key part of my teaching as I move forward. And I then chose to do a master's at Exeter University. And during that master's, was fortunate to become a lecturer at Exeter. So I kind of built a psychology module that I took third year students through that was really rooted in this mindfulness, mental health world. And at the same time, begun delivering mindfulness-based cognitive therapy alongside a lecturer at the university that I now work very closely with. And that kind of was my kickstart. So I begun my journey into speaking during that time because of the lecturing kind of gave me an insight into speaking. And was fortunate to speak at some various places, Oxford University and Toronto University. And that kind of kickstarted me. I started realizing, wow, I care about this mental health thing quite a lot. And what I was learning was proving to be of value to people that were hearing it. So it really motivated me to continue. And then in my summer last year, as I was kind of completing the masters, I was approached by a charity, a cancer charity that's very close to my family's hearts, that supports young women on their journey through cancer, to see if I could build them a program that could support these women's journey during such a challenging time in their lives. And I then spent about 2 months really diving into the world of cancer, trying to understand it as best I could, to try and gain some perspective so I could guide these women during that time. And I then delivered that program, and it proved to be quite successful, which is fantastic because it was so meaningful to me that I was supporting them. And once I saw the program kind of had some legs and could actually be of value, I then thought, how could I create some slight adjustments and fit this to various different other domains of life, in the corporate world, to maybe some younger people, to entrepreneurs. And then at that point, I was very fortunate to be approached by Coca-Cola, because I've been posting a lot of content online, to see if I could take their staff through the program. So over the last sort of 8 weeks leading into the start of January, I took a huge team of their staff through this program, which was fantastic, awesome to connect with so many people. And from there, it's really just been building conversations. Now I work with quite a range of different corporate companies, and yeah, it's been an exciting journey. And now I'm in this space where I'm delivering this journey to lots of different people and making a lot of content online. And that kind of brings us up to today, where I am now.
Fantastic journey. And what I hear right from the beginning was that in entering that module about mindfulness, it was a real transformational moment for you, because I was hearing that you were almost resisting it in the early days.
Yeah,
and it wasn't
definitely.
until you started getting really into it, and also almost accepted it and allowed it just to happen, that you then found your passion with it, really. Would you say that's what happened? Or
Yeah, 100%. As many people are, and definitely a lot of young people, a lot of people I know, live in quite a distracted world where we can kind of, anytime you're at all bored or walking or anything, technology can be there to create stimulation. And I think that led to me spending very, very little time in silence, just with my own thoughts, basically, because you can listen to music in the shower, listen to TV when you're getting ready, always kind of have some kind of stimulation. And when I started that mindfulness course, I was like, wow, I've got to spend some time in silence here. And that was new to my mind, just because I'd got so used to it. And I didn't think anything bad of it. I just thought that's how things are done. All my friends spend a lot of time distracted. And it was once I started spending some time in silence that I began to see, goodness me, I could make some kind of improvements in the way I communicate with myself and the way I respond to different situations. And that beginning kind of change in how much time I spend in silence actually became so transformative, because I started to think, wow, this is good to spend time in silence. And once I was spending time in silence, I started to think about what I could actually be doing, because I think we spend so much time distracted. We don't give our mind much space to actually think and create new ideas. And that was kind of the transformation. It gave me time to think, basically. And that was incredibly, incredibly valuable to me.
Wow. So it gave you time to think. It was a weird experience at first, I hear, to be silent, but
Definitely.
It really, really supported you to understand yourself and develop yourself, is what I'm hearing. So what would you say? Because, I know lots of people, and it's not just your generation. I get completely distracted by my phone and by what's going on social media and things. It's become almost an obsessive part of life for many of us.
Definitely.
What would you say to us to help us become less addicted? Because I think we all are getting addicted to social media and to our phones. What would you recommend would be a helpful thing for us to do?
Definitely. I think that's a really important topic, and something I'm speaking about more and more now, because it's unusual to find anyone that doesn't feel a bit of an addictive tendency towards their technology. So What I think is useful to first understand is, like anything, I think if we understand where an addiction comes from, it can kind of then we can create an idea of how could I respond to this addiction. So when you look at something like social media, I think it's important to recognize how the platform is built to be so addictive. And this isn't in any way saying social media is bad. I think social media is fantastic for sharing and learning, but I think we have to be mindful of our relationship with it so that it's used for good effectively. But when we look at like a social media feed, for example, so when you're beginning to scroll through, often what it can look like as you scroll is maybe you're not that interested in that post and that one's a bit boring. And occasionally you get a post that's like, wow, that's quite interesting. That's exciting. And it stimulates your kind of dopamine receptor. You think, cool. And then you continue scrolling and it's boring and not interesting. And then eventually you get that spike again. And when you look at that model, a chap called Skinner, who was one of the big kind of addiction psychologists back
Skinner's
in the 90s. Yeah, Skinner's pigeons. Yeah, Skinner's boxes. He kind of did a lot of research around rats and pigeons. And in the 1950s, he was one of the professors at Harvard. And one of the things he discovered is you can condition a rat to press a lever to know that it will get some food. So that's a super easy kind of conditioning process to bring a rat to do. You can then condition a rat to know that every third time they press the lever, the food will come. And the addictive behavior slightly increases. They begin to become more interested with clicking it 3 times, then they know the reward will come. Then what he discovered is if you randomize the amount of times the rat has to click the lever to get the reward, so it could come on 1, could come on 10, could come on 20, could come on 3, suddenly the addictive behavior skyrockets because the reward is becoming random. And if you look at something like how the model of casinos and gambling is built, it's very similar. Most of the time you don't win, sometimes you do, so you continue to come back and a compulsive behavior grows.
Yes.
And that's exactly the same as how the social media feeds are all built. We have a random reward to our dopamine receptor every so often, which can make us have that compulsive tendency to kind of seek to scroll for longer and scroll for longer and longer so that we know we'll get that dopamine reward because we're conditioned to understand if we scroll for long enough, we will experience dopamine, basically.
Yes.
So I think that's useful to understand firstly. That's kind of why it's addictive. So it's not unusual that we've all become addictive to these feeds. It's very intelligently designed to ensure because obviously the product is our eyes spending time on the screen. So that's useful to understand. Then when I think about how can we actually reduce this addictive tendency, I think it's really important to start thinking, how are we framing our relationship with the tech in our mind? So for many of us, I think, although it can be unusual to think of it in this way, it almost is a case that the technology is in control and it's using us and we're kind of along for the ride. So it's constantly like lighting up notifications, constantly pulling us towards the technology and creating that compulsive nature, rather than us feeling like we're in control and we're the one that intentionally thinks, right, I'm going to go and spend some time on my phone and use it in a way that's of value to me and my life. So I think it's really important to start framing it in your head. How can you start separating out your phone rather than I will always compulsively check it every time I'm bored of my work or finish a call or whatever it may be, rather than start structuring out in your day. Like, even if you did it into your calendar, like at 9:30, I'll go on my phone for 20 minutes and I'll connect with people, I'll share some posts, I'll do whatever it may be, I'll watch some videos that are useful for me. But start seeing it as, I'm going to intentionally use this phone in a way that's going to be of value to me, rather than the phone just constantly using us. So I think that's important to recognize. And then I really think there's value in just having intentional breaks from the tech, and that could be turning the phone off for like 60 minutes in the evening. I think it's a deliberate process in the technology that the iPhones and everything take about 15 to 20 seconds to turn on. I'm sure they have technology that could turn on quicker than that. I don't think they want them necessarily to be turned off. And if you do turn them off in the evening, if you say start beginning a bit of structure in your head, like 7:30 till 8:30, I'll just turn my phone off. And when it's off, you really are less inclined to go and actually check it, because then you've got to really admit to yourself, I'm addicted, if I'm going to go hold down the on button and go turn it back on. So I think structuring out time with it off is incredibly valuable, alongside reducing things like notifications, turning all of that stuff off. So you
Yes.
begin to be the one in control rather than the phone being the one in control.
Yes, I think that's the thing, is you are in charge of your phone. Your phone is not in charge of you, and you have a choice
100%.
as to how you work with it. And certainly, I know for me, I've switched off WhatsApp. I've silenced all my groups and things that are on there because it was just so
Fantastic.
distracting. And I guess there's other things we can do that will help us feel like we're more in charge of it. So that's fabulous to hear about that, and how we can, it's really good to also understand that they are designed for us to be addicted to. So, it's about taking back some control there for ourselves. So, TJ, you also mentioned that while you were going through this process of the mindfulness module, that you began to understand yourself better, that you were able to manage yourself differently. How can you give us an example of how it impacted your behavior and your reactions to things through becoming more of a mindfulness practitioner?
Definitely. So I never really spent a lot of time thinking about this idea of self-talk and this kind of conversation that we've got going on in our head. And it was only once
Yes.
I began spending a bit more time in silence, I started to think, wow, I've got this voice like constantly there, and we're chatting away to it and interacting with it. And I think the world that we're living in now, with a lot of kind of comparison that we experience online, competition, we've got a very kind of fast paced, go mentality with work. We can experience quite a lot of negative self talk, judging ourselves for not making enough progress, not doing enough in our days, not being healthy enough,
Yes.
whatever it may be. But we can have a lot of challenges within our self talk. And when I began this mindfulness journey, I started to realize like I was occasionally kind of criticizing my behavior, being judgmental of what I was doing. Just like many people I speak to now, I think it's very normal for us to have that kind of self talk. And it was when I was in the mindfulness practices that I started to recognize the moments where I was being quite judgmental, and started to think, how could I build a better relationship with my mind and actually kind of become friends with my mind and be quite uplifting and supportive to my experience, rather than being kind of this negative sibling that's criticizing myself all the time. So
Yes.
that was kind of the main transformation I saw in the early days, was becoming greater friends and building that relationship with my thought pattern. So I began to big myself up a bit more rather than kind of progressively bring myself down. And one of the things I found really valuable to do, and if you are someone looking to improve your self-talk, if that's something you struggle with, is at the end of the week, often we can kind of think, wow, these are all the things I've got to do next week. Goodness me, like I've got a lot to do. And we can spend time kind of creating more stress within our head and very little time reflecting on everything we are doing. And I think if you actually look at what we're all doing these days, it's absolutely crazy how much work we're doing, the diverse range of skills we're having to just gain and do all the time. So I think an exercise at the end of the week is really good, just to fight for 5 or 10 minutes, sit down and write down everything you're happy with that you did this week. So it could be health-wise, it could be movement, food, it could be connecting with some people in relationships, it could be some work you've done. But we are going to have negative self-talk. That's just kind of the situation now. It's going to happen in this comparative society we live in. I think we need to proactively build in positive self-talk to kind of rebalance the scale. And the more time you spend intentionally building that self-talk into your life, kind of then naturally begins to come a bit. So it might come in the mindfulness practices. It might just begin to appear in your head. Oh yeah, like congratulating yourself for what you're doing, and kind of start rebalancing the scale on that conversation. I think super key to our mental health.
That is just fantastic. You've really given me something there, actually, because I've had a challenging week this week. I've really felt I've hit the wall of lockdown, as it were. And
Definitely.
actually, I'm going to do that today. I'm going to sit down and just recognize, what have I achieved? Because I have achieved a lot. And also, what am I grateful for? Because there's so much around me that I am grateful for. So that is,
Definitely.
you're very incredibly inspiring, TJ. I don't know whether you appreciate how inspiring you are, but you've totally inspired me there. So thank you for that.
No problem.
And so I kind of want to move on then to thinking about your work now more in the corporate world. because
Yeah.
you started off with your program working with women who had cancer and stuff, and that was really valuable, and you were able to contribute massively there. But I know that the likes of Coca-Cola and other corporates are interested in you and have engaged with you to support them in the mental health of their people within their organizations. And, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm ageist here, because I'm not, because I think we, you know, whatever age we are, we can make a contribution, and you are definitely making a contribution at the age of 23. And so what's it like? I want to know a bit more about what's it like, because you are a leader and you're going in there to influence within these corporations with probably some quite different executives. I'm thinking, you know, some will be up for it, some of them won't be up for it. Tell us a bit more about what that's like and what you found useful for yourself.
Yeah, so it definitely has been an unusual experience, because I'm always mindful that I am obviously a lot younger than many of the people I communicate with. And one of the things that's so important to me in kind of my journey and with all of this work is I'm basically just trying to learn and understand, and we can dive a bit into kind of what the work actually looks like within the corporate program. But I'm trying to learn and understand as many behaviors as I can that I can integrate into my life to support my mental health and the experience that I have going on. Really try and embody these skills. And then once I've seen and kind of experienced them and interact with them and seen the value it can bring, I then kind of begin to move them into the program and share them with people. And I kind of just go into it with the mindset of, I'm going to share with you kind of what I've seen to be of value to me and to everyone I work with. And I really just recommend being experimental and just trying them out and having an open mind. And some things may be super useful, some things might not be useful. But I kind of have just been moving in with that mentality of be as open-minded as you can, the people I chat to. And I've just found that if people kind of trust that I'm embodying these things, then they kind of experiment with them. And then hopefully, and the reason all these things are in the programs is because they are of great value. And I think when people begin to experience these behaviors early on and see the value, they begin to kind of gain some trust that maybe the future conversations we have might be pretty useful.
Wow. So getting something in that's of value early on, but also I'm hearing there's that great quote of Gandhi's that comes to me about be the change you want to see in the world. So you're working on yourself first and then authentically sharing with those leaders within organizations that you're working with what has worked for you,
sure.
and encouraging them to experiment with it. I like the idea of the experimentation, that it's not a fixed way. Not everything will work for everybody. It's about you engaging with what works for you, but finding out first of all. So fantastic.
Yeah,
fantastic.
I was just gonna. Sorry, yeah, go for it.
No. You say what you're going to say.
I was just gonna kind of explain the theory a bit behind that, because
yes,
when I look at this mental health world, I think for the last sort of 50 to 100 years, whenever these kind of mental health conversations really started to get going, we have been actively trying to seek treatment for the problem of anxiety and depression, which I think is absolutely fantastic. We, of course, need solutions, therapies, programs, everything we can to treat people that are engaged in that experience, to try and help them to navigate it. But I also think that the world we're now living in, with all this like media fear and technology and comparison, everything we have going online, the world is now kind of fostering and is quite conducive to lots of us experiencing feelings of anxiety or worry or stress or fear or depression, whatever it may be. So I think many of us can experience it. So I'm really kind of approaching these programs, and kind of how I'm guiding corporates is, rather than seeking to find a treatment and solution for anxiety and depression, I think it's actually really valuable to look at proactively preventing ourselves experiencing them in the first place through engaging in behaviors that work to kind of balance us physiologically and psychologically, so that we're actually less likely to head towards those states of mind. And if we do, we're kind of constantly, whilst we're in a sort of more balanced state of mind, equipping ourselves with the tools we need to navigate them when they arise. So that's kind of my mentality towards it, more proactive prevention rather than just looking for treatment.
Yes, yes. I love that. I love the whole idea of being proactive around it, and self-care and well-being so, so important, not just for leaders and organizations, but for everybody. You think about parents being at home, working from home, managing the current schooling challenges and all that sort of thing. Everyone in the world can benefit from that proactive approach to taking care of ourselves and our mental well-being.
For sure.
So I've noticed in my own practice that mental well-being and the whole idea of meditation, 5 years ago, even, it was a bit kind of, oh, you're not going to ask me to sit in a room and close my eyes, are you? It was all a bit
Yeah,
woo-woo. And I'd say of late, in the last 2 years, I'd say it has become a lot more okay and acceptable. And the whole idea of talking about mental health has become much less stigmatized than it used to be. Is this your experience too? I'm just wondering if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, definitely. So if anyone had told me as I was growing up that I would sit on calls guiding 100 people through a meditation, I would have thought, what? No way. Like where would that possibly come from? So I never saw the meditation thing coming. And I think when a problem grows within a society and gets bigger and bigger, humans begin to think, just like how evolution works, we need to find solutions for this.
Yeah.
And solutions like meditation and like the importance of destigmatizing this challenge that we're all facing so that we can actively talk about it, put funding into it. I think it's kind of natural human evolution to think, okay, this is one of our priorities now. This is something we have to
Yeah.
solve. Like we never
Yes.
had incredibly high suicide rates back in the day. It wasn't a thing within our society. And I think when we see a challenge grow so much, it means humans instinctively respond in a way that's, wow, we need to find a solution now. And I think
Yes.
that's why something like mindfulness is growing. And I think it's why the destigmatization is taking place.
Yes, yes. Fantastic. It's all very much for the good, I think. Fantastic.
100%.
So I'm really conscious that it's coming to the end of our conversation. These
Blimey, that's
conversations, they
fast.
just seem to go like that, don't they? And so I'm going to ask you, is there any advice you would pass on in these challenging times that we're all in? I mean, in the UK, we're in our third lockdown. It feels like it's been going on forever. What advice would you pass on to people as your sort of parting words, TJ?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I think one of the reasons many of us are struggling with our mental health now is our kind of behavior as a human being, as like an animal on this planet, has really changed. So we're moving a lot less. Our diets have massively changed over the last 100 years. We're living in this technological world. And I think the change in our kind of physiological and psychological balance is actually causing a lot of our challenges. So there are some behaviors that I think are really, really imperative to our life. Moving is one of them. Prioritizing our gut health is one of them. Kind of diversifying the fruit and veg and fibrous foods that go into our stomach. Things like prioritizing sleep, prioritizing our relationship with nature. Unsurprisingly, after we spent 99.9% of human history living out there. And as much as I quite like my house with walls and a shower and a nice bed, nature has a huge amount to offer us kind of physiologically and psychologically in our immune system. So there are some really fundamental behaviors: movement, nature, sleep, mindfulness. What I think we should be doing on a weekly basis, and this is what I do on a Sunday night, is look and kind of consider in your head what behavior could be of value to me over this next week. It might be the food you're putting into your body. It might be moving more. It might be prioritizing your sleep. It might be thinking about your relationship with technology. But I think every Sunday night, as you're kind of just reflecting and thinking what this next week is going to be like, pick one behavior, because I think one of the challenges is there's loads of advice pumping out now, and because there's so much, we can think, oh yeah, that'd be good, oh that'd be great, yeah, I need to do that, can lead to so many that we get kind of an overwhelm and end up actually making no progress at all.
Yeah.
So I think every Sunday,
yes.
pick a behavior that you're going to focus on for the next week: self-talk, movement, sleep, nature, whatever it may be. Pick one,
Yes.
focus on it all week, reflect on the value it's had on your kind of self-talk reflection on your Friday afternoon. And then on the next Sunday, pick a new behavior so that we're sort of proactively looking to start making progress within our mental health and the experience we're having in our mind.
That is fantastic advice. Thank you so much for that. Just choose one, practice it for a week and then reflect and see how that's impacted you. Thank you so much, TJ.
100%.
You've been an absolute delight to talk to today. I could talk, I say this to, I often say this to my guests, if I could talk to you all day, there's so much more that we could talk about as well, I'm sure. So we maybe will re-engage at some point. I'd also like to thank those people that have watched today. For those that are watching in catch up, do put your comments in the posts below. I will always respond to them. In the meantime, everybody have a great weekend. Just to remind you that next week we have the wonderful Jessica Chivers joining us for Lessons in Leadership. Jessica runs Talent Keepers and also has written the book Mother's Work, which is a hugely successful book supporting mothers getting back into the working environment, having had their children. So do join us to hear from Jessica. And again, thank you again, TJ. It's been a real pleasure. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, Mary.